What if I told you that the government, big corporations, and even some doctors spent decades trying to convince your grandfather he was wrong, that the same brown bottle he kept in his garage, toolbox, or under the sink was somehow outdated, unsafe, even reckless? That the kind of practical, hands-on knowledge men relied on after World War II was something that needed to be replaced? Well, science is finally catching up to what those men already knew, and the verdict is in. They were right. Today, we are counting down 25 hydrogen peroxide hacks from the 1960s that working men used every day. The ones that were dismissed, replaced, or quietly pushed aside by the establishment, and that researchers are now recognizing as some of the most effective, low-cost solutions ever used. Stay until the end because number one comes straight out of wartime thinking, and it is going to completely change how you think about that little brown bottle forever. Before we dive in, let me paint you a picture. It is 1962. Your grandpa has just come home after a long day of work. His hands are rough, his shirt smells like oil or sweat, and sitting nearby is a brown bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide next to baking soda, tools, and whatever else he needs to get things done. He is using it to clean, to fix, to maintain, to solve problems without overthinking it. Some people think it is old-fashioned. A doctor might question it, and slowly companies start pushing new products telling him there are better, safer, more modern ways to do the same things. Sound familiar? Let us start the countdown. 1. Treating athletes' foot and fungus between the toes. This one was considered backwoods medicine by the time the 70s rolled around, but here is exactly how Grandpa did it. He would fill a shallow basin or an old metal pan with warm water, add roughly half a cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide, and soak both feet for about 20 to 30 minutes. He did this every other evening for 2 weeks straight. The area between the toes, which is the warm, moist, dark environment where fungal growth absolutely thrives, was directly exposed to the oxidizing effect of the peroxide. What happens chemically is that hydrogen peroxide releases oxygen on contact with organic material, and fungal cells cannot tolerate that oxidative burst. It disrupts their cell membranes. Modern dermatologists have confirmed that diluted hydrogen peroxide does have genuine antifungal properties, and foot soaks using this method are now being revisited in clinical literature. Back in his day, men were told to just buy a powder from the pharmacy and stop soaking their feet in household chemicals. 2. Soaking seeds before planting to improve germination. Grandpa would place vegetable and flower seeds in a small dish with a solution of 1 TSP hydrogen peroxide per cup of water and soak them for 30 minutes before planting. He noticed significantly faster uniform sprouting compared to dry planting. Seed companies at the time guarded proprietary treatments and discouraged home chemical use on seeds. Modern seed science confirms that the oxidative effect of diluted hydrogen peroxide softens seed coatings, kills surface mold and pathogen spores, and stimulates the enzymatic processes that trigger germination. This is now used in commercial seed treatment protocols. 3. Sanitizing wooden tool handles against infection. After any cut or scrape in the workshop, the dirty tool handle was often the real danger. Grandpa would pour hydrogen peroxide directly onto wooden handles and let it bubble and fizz completely before wiping dry. He did this after any injury near his tools. Medical authorities at the time began discouraging wound cleaning with hydrogen peroxide in the late 60s, arguing it damaged tissue. But the use on surfaces and tool handles was never properly addressed, and it works remarkably well. The bubbling reaction on organic material indicates active oxidation killing bacteria. Modern infection control research supports using diluted peroxide on non-living contaminated surfaces. 4. Reviving a dead car battery with peroxide and baking soda. This one sounds wild, but it is grounded in chemistry. When a lead-acid battery develops sulfation, meaning sulfate crystals build up on the lead plates, it loses capacity. Grandpa would carefully neutralize the existing acid in a drained battery cell, flush it with distilled water, and then introduce a diluted mixture involving hydrogen peroxide to help break up that sulfate buildup before attempting a slow charge. The oxidative properties help dissolve the crystalline deposits. This was absolutely forbidden by battery manufacturers because it voided warranties and competed with their replacement sales. It does not work on severely damaged batteries, but on partially sulfated ones, it genuinely helped restore function. 5. Whitening teeth with a homemade paste. Before any commercial whitening product existed, men mixed hydrogen peroxide with enough baking soda to form a thick paste and brushed their teeth with it twice a week. The peroxide penetrates the enamel and breaks apart the carbon-based molecular chains responsible for tooth discoloration. This was banned or strongly discouraged by dentists who claimed it eroded enamel. However, research conducted in the last decade shows that 3% hydrogen peroxide used briefly and not daily does not cause meaningful damage and is actually the active ingredient in virtually every professional whitening system sold today. 6. Treating ear infections and trapped water in the ear canal. Grandpa would tilt his head to one side, fill a small medicine dropper with 3% hydrogen peroxide, place 3 to 4 drops into the affected ear, and hold still for 60 seconds while it fizzed. Then he would tilt his head the other direction and drain. He did this at the first sign of swimmer's ear or trapped water after bathing in the creek. Physicians at the time discouraged any home ear treatments, but current medical research confirms that diluted hydrogen peroxide effectively softens earwax, kills bacteria in the outer ear canal, and is actually used in some clinical eardrop formulations today. 7. Killing mold in windowsills and wooden frames. Old houses in that era had single-pane windows and tremendous condensation issues. Grandpa would spray undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide directly onto the moldy wood, allow it to sit for 10 full minutes, then scrub with a stiff brush and wipe completely dry. He understood that sealing porous wood after treatment mattered, so he would follow up with linseed oil. Health authorities and window manufacturers pushed chemical bleach solutions instead, but bleach does not penetrate porous wood, while hydrogen peroxide does, actually killing mold roots below the surface. Modern mycologists confirm this distinction is critical. 8. Brightening and disinfecting a concrete basement floor. After flooding or seasonal dampness caused organic growth on concrete, Grandpa would mix 1 part hydrogen peroxide with 4 parts water in a garden sprayer, saturate the floor, let it dwell for 15 minutes, then scrub with a stiff broom and rinse. The peroxide would kill mildew, bacteria, and surface algae, while also lifting some of the gray discoloration that accumulated over years. Concrete suppliers and floor coating companies pushed expensive products instead. Science now confirms that hydrogen peroxide is one of the most effective and environmentally safe mold and mildew treatments on porous mineral surfaces. 9. Treating infected splinters and embedded debris. Rather than digging immediately with a needle, Grandpa would first soak the affected finger or hand in a small cup of hydrogen peroxide for 5 minutes. The fizzing reaction would often help draw the splinter slightly toward the surface while simultaneously killing any bacteria around the wound. He would then use a sterilized needle. Wound care manuals of that era began explicitly saying to stop using peroxide on skin, but limited application during initial infection control before extraction is now being reconsidered, particularly for contaminated debris injuries where bacterial load is high. 10. Cleaning and deodorizing an outhouse or composting toilet. Many rural men still used outhouses in the early 60s. Grandpa would dilute hydrogen peroxide heavily, about 1 part to 10 parts water, and pour it down the seat hole weekly. It would react with the organic material, suppressing odor-causing bacteria and reducing fly populations without destroying the composting process the way harsh chemicals would. Health departments pushed lime exclusively, but research into sustainable sanitation now acknowledges that diluted hydrogen peroxide is far less damaging to beneficial microbial processes than calcium hydroxide lime, while still providing meaningful odor and pathogen control. 11. Preserving harvested game meat before refrigeration. After a successful hunt, if refrigeration was not immediately available, Grandpa would rinse the cavity of dressed game with a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution, about 1 TBSP per quart of cold water. This brief rinse would kill surface bacteria that cause rapid spoilage and off flavors without leaving chemical residue. The peroxide breaks down into water and oxygen within minutes. Meat inspectors and butchers of that era were explicitly trained to reject any chemically treated game. But food scientists today recognize that brief oxidative rinses dramatically extend the safe handling window of fresh meat without contamination. 12. Controlling aphids and soft-bodied insects on garden plants. Grandpa mixed 1 TBSP of 3% hydrogen peroxide with 1 cup of water, put it in a hand pump sprayer, and applied it to the undersides of leaves where aphids clustered. The oxygen burst on contact with the soft bodies of these insects effectively disrupts their cellular function. He would spray in the early morning and avoid direct sunlight immediately after application to prevent leaf burn. Agricultural extension offices at the time promoted only commercial insecticides, many of which we now know were carcinogenic. Modern organic gardening research validates diluted hydrogen peroxide as a legitimate and non-toxic pest control agent. 13. Cleaning and unblocking a clogged drain. Before any commercial drain cleaner existed in every hardware store, Grandpa would pour half a cup of baking soda directly down a slow drain, follow it immediately with half a cup of hydrogen peroxide, let the fizzing reaction work for 20 minutes, then flush with a full kettle of boiling water. The combination creates a mechanical scrubbing effect from the gas production, while the peroxide oxidizes grease and organic buildup along the pipe walls. Plumbers actively discourage this because it competed with their services. Environmental scientists now prefer this method over sodium hydroxide-based drain cleaners, which corrode pipes and contaminate groundwater. 14. Removing yellow armpit stains from white work shirts. Men in the 60s wore white dress shirts 5 days a week, and those shirts were expensive relative to income. Grandpa would mix equal parts hydrogen peroxide and dish soap, apply it directly to the yellowed fabric, and then sprinkle just a pinch of baking soda on top. He would work it in with an old toothbrush using gentle circular motions. Let it sit for 30 minutes in the sunlight, then rinse with cold water. The combination of oxidation from the peroxide and the gentle abrasive quality of baking soda would break down the protein and mineral compounds in sweat stains that had bonded with the fabric fibers. Scientists now confirm this is actually more effective than most enzyme-based commercial stain removers on set-in protein stains. 15. Disinfecting food storage jars and crocks before canning. Before sealing summer vegetables or fruits, Grandpa would rinse sterilized jars with a hydrogen peroxide solution, let them air dry upside down, and then proceed with filling. This double sterilization step dramatically reduced mold and bacterial contamination in canned goods. Extension programs and canning authorities of that era wanted strict adherence to their approved boiling protocols only and considered any deviation dangerous. Food preservation researchers now recognize that hydrogen peroxide is an approved sanitizing rinse in commercial food processing, and the home method Grandpa used was absolutely sound science. 16. Whitening and brightening the grout between floor tiles. Using an old paintbrush, Grandpa would apply full-strength 3% hydrogen peroxide directly onto dirty grout lines and allow it to sit for at least 15 minutes before scrubbing with a stiff toothbrush and rinsing. The oxidation would lift staining compounds from within the porous grout surface. Tile companies push proprietary grout cleaners. Material scientists now confirm that hydrogen peroxide is actually gentler on cementitious grout than chlorine bleach, while being equally effective at removing biological staining. 17. Neutralizing the acid in a bee or wasp sting. When Grandpa got stung out in the garden or yard, he would immediately dab hydrogen peroxide directly onto the sting site after removing the stinger. He understood it was not just about disinfection, but about disrupting the venom proteins through oxidation, which reduced both the burning sensation and subsequent swelling. First aid manuals of that era recommended antihistamine creams or cold packs exclusively. Venom researchers now confirm that oxidative agents applied immediately after a sting can partially denature the protein components of Hymenoptera venom, reducing local reaction intensity. 18. Treating a dog or livestock wound in the field. When an animal on the farm suffered a cut or puncture wound far from veterinary care, Grandpa would flush it with diluted hydrogen peroxide, watch the fizzing confirm bacterial contamination was present, and allow it to dry naturally before bandaging loosely. Veterinarians at the time were split on this, but the agricultural advice coming from extension offices discouraged it. Modern veterinary wound care literature now acknowledges that a single initial flush with diluted peroxide on a heavily contaminated field wound is preferable to no treatment while arranging proper veterinary attention. 19. Brightening a dingy yellowed bathtub without scrubbing chemicals. Grandpa would saturate old cotton rags with undiluted hydrogen peroxide and lay them flat against the yellowed enamel and porcelain surfaces of the bathtub, leaving them in contact for 45 minutes to an hour. The sustained oxidative exposure would lift the calcium and biological staining from the surface without abrasive scrubbing that could scratch enamel. Porcelain manufacturers push their own branded cleaners. Materials conservation researchers have since confirmed that hydrogen peroxide is one of the safest surface brightening agents for vintage enamel fixtures because it does not etch the surface. 20. Preventing root rot in container plants and garden beds. When Grandpa noticed his potted plants drooping from overwatering and suspected root rot, he would water them once with a solution of 1 TSP of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water. The extra oxygen released directly into the soil would kill the anaerobic fungi responsible for rot, while also providing oxygen-starved roots with an immediate boost. Nurseries and fertilizer companies push specialized fungicide products instead. Plant pathology research now validates exactly this approach, and hydrogen peroxide soil drenches are used by professional orchid and tropical plant growers worldwide. 21. Cleaning and sanitizing a wooden beehive before the new season. Before placing a hive for the spring, Grandpa would wipe down every internal wooden surface with a cloth dampened with 3% hydrogen peroxide, paying particular attention to any areas showing residue from the previous colony. He would then allow everything to air for 24 hours before introducing bees. Beekeeping associations at the time recommended harsh chemical fumigation instead. Modern apiculture research shows that hydrogen peroxide is effective against the spores of American foul brood and wax moth larvae without leaving residue that harms new bee colony, unlike chemical fumigant. 22. Removing stubborn adhesive and tape residue from glass and metal. When old price labels, tape, or adhesive residue stubbornly clung to glass jars, metal surfaces, or tools, Grandpa would soak a rag in hydrogen peroxide, press it over the residue for 10 minutes, and then rub firmly. The oxidative reaction degraded the polymer chains in older adhesives, which were predominantly natural rubber or shellac-based in that era, releasing their grip without scratching the underlying surface. Hardware stores pushed commercial solvents that were genuinely toxic. Surface chemistry confirms that oxidative methods are particularly effective on natural and semi-natural adhesive compounds. 23. Descaling and cleaning a cast iron or steel cooking pot exterior. The outside of a pot accumulates carbonized grease and mineral scale over years of stove use. Grandpa would apply a thick paste of hydrogen peroxide mixed with cream of tartar to the exterior. Wrap the pot in damp newspaper to keep the paste moist, and leave it for 2 hours before scrubbing. The oxidation combined with the mild acidity of cream of tartar would loosen carbonized deposits at the molecular level. Cast iron cookware companies and cleaning product manufacturers pushed abrasive scouring pads instead. Food equipment scientists now confirm this combination is one of the most effective non-abrasive methods for exterior cookware restoration. 24. Using hydrogen peroxide as a natural wood bleach for stain removal. When hardwood floors or furniture develop dark water stains or tannin darkening, Grandpa would brush a more concentrated solution onto the affected wood, allow it to penetrate fully as it fizzed against the organic staining compounds, then wipe it away and let the wood dry completely before any finishing. The peroxide would oxidize the colored tannin and mineral compounds, returning the wood closer to its natural tone. Furniture manufacturers and floor finishing companies pushed proprietary wood bleaches that often contained oxalic acid and other genuinely dangerous compounds. Wood conservation scientists now confirm that hydrogen peroxide is the safest and most controllable wood brightening agent available, and it is used in museum furniture restoration. 25. The most brilliant and unexpectedly validated hack of them all, using hydrogen peroxide to naturally preserve and extend the freshness of drinking water and stored water supplies. Grandpa would add just 2 to 3 drops of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon to stored water in crocks, barrels, or ceramic jugs. Not enough to affect taste, but enough to maintain a minimal oxidative environment that suppressed bacterial and algal growth. In an era before municipal water treatment reached rural communities, This was his primary method for keeping stored water safe through summer months. Health authorities at the time called it quackery, but here is what we now know. Hydrogen peroxide water treatment is an established industrial and municipal water purification method. The World Health Organization recognizes it at the trace concentrations Grandpa used. It breaks down completely to water and oxygen within hours, leaving no residue whatsoever. He had essentially invented a primitive but chemically sound version of what water treatment engineers use today. So the next time someone dismisses the old ways, remember that Grandpa's banned brown bottle was sitting quietly on that garage shelf, filled with a molecule so simple it is just 2 hydrogen atoms and 2 oxygen atoms bonded together. And yet it was doing things that companies with laboratories and marketing budgets could not match with 100 specialized products. Share this with someone who still has their grandfather's old workshop manual. And if you found even one of these hacks useful, the like button is right there, because it helps this kind of forgotten knowledge reach people who actually need it. If this story changed the way you look at the simple tools in your cabinet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are excavating the history and practical wisdom they tried to bury. Let's plant the seeds for the future. The next treasure trove will be open soon.